It was the kind of night where secrets slip through the shadows, and little Emily Henderson couldn't sleep. The full October moon hovered silently over Elk Hollow, casting silver light over pine trees that stood like sentinels around the quiet mountain town. The Hendersons' house, nestled at the end of Pine Ridge Road, looked peaceful under the moonlight. But inside, one bedroom window remained lit, Emily's. She lay wide awake in bed, the covers tucked under her chin, her copper-red hair fanned out on the pillow. The rest of the house had gone quiet long ago. Her mom, Laura, was a schoolteacher who rose before sunrise. Her dad, David, was a mechanic and always in bed by 10. Even their golden retriever, Moose, snored softly in the hallway. But Emily couldn't sleep. Not tonight. Not with the way Blaze had been acting. Blaze was their kitten, jet black, barely 10 weeks old, with one tiny white spot on his chest. He had been the runt of a stray litter born in their garage, and the only one who survived. Emily had begged to keep him. From the moment she held his shivering body in her hands, she felt like he belonged to her, not just as a pet, but as a friend. For weeks, they'd been inseparable. Blaze would curl up in her hoodie pocket while she read books in the treehouse, or follow her on tiptoes down the hallway. But something had changed in recent nights. Blaze had grown distant. Not in the daytime. He still napped in sunbeams and chased feathers like any house cat. But once night fell and the moon climbed high, Blaze would sit by the window, ears up, staring into the forest as if listening for something only he could hear. Tonight, his behavior was even stranger. Emily shifted under her covers, eyes barely open. Blaze was on the windowsill again, tail twitching, eyes fixed on the trees beyond the backyard. But this time, he wasn't just watching. He was making a sound. It wasn't a meow. Not really. It was something softer, almost like a chirrup crossed with a whisper. A signal? Emily held her breath. Then, out of nowhere, a shape emerged from the shadows. It leapt onto the windowsill with impossible grace. Silent, large, and wild. Emily's heart jumped into her throat. It was a bobcat. She knew it instantly from her school trip to Banff last year. The spotted fur, the muscular frame, the pointed black-tipped ears. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. She froze, her small fingers gripping the sheets. Any movement might draw attention. Her eyes darted to Blaze, but Blaze didn't flee. He didn't hiss. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he stood up and approached the wild animal, calmly, like greeting an old friend. The bobcat lowered its head, sniffed Blaze, then gently, incredibly gently, picked him up by the scruff of his neck, the way a mother carries her young. Blaze dangled there, limp and trusting, and then, without a sound, the bobcat turned and leapt down from the window, disappearing into the trees beyond the fence. Emily shot upright, panic flooding her chest. "Blaze!" she whispered. She dashed to the window, fingers fumbling at the latch, and threw it open. Outside, under the moonlight, she could barely make out a dark figure disappearing into the tree line. The bobcat was moving fast, but Emily caught one last glimpse of Blaze, hanging from its jaws like a kitten being carried home. "No!" her mind cried. "No, no, 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 no!" She wanted to scream, to run into her parents' room, to grab a flashlight, but she didn't. Because what could she say? "Mom, a wild bobcat came to my window and took our kitten, and he let it." It sounded ridiculous, and yet she had seen it with her own eyes. She sank onto the floor, her legs trembling. What had just happened? Why hadn't Blaze resisted? Why had he gone willingly? The questions buzzed in her head like angry bees. The woods had always seemed magical at night, mysterious, sure, but never dangerous. Now they loomed like a silent maze filled with secrets. She thought about Blaze being carried off, imagined awful things: sharp teeth, deep caves, cold rain. Tears welled in her eyes, but beneath the fear, something else stirred: confusion, wonder. That bobcat hadn't attacked Blaze. It hadn't looked hungry or violent. Its movements were careful, almost tender, as if Blaze was one of its own. Could that be possible? She wiped her face, stood up, and stared long into the forest. The wind whispered through the pine needles, rustling like soft voices just beyond reach. She didn't know what to think. All she knew was this: Blaze was gone, and he hadn't run away. He had been taken, or chosen. Either way, the world had shifted under her feet, and Emily Henderson was determined to find out why. 10 days passed. The Henderson home settled back into routine, mostly. David returned to his garage, Laura to her lesson plans, and even Moose, the family dog, stopped sniffing around Blaze's empty basket. The flyer Emily had taped to the mailbox curled at the corners from wind and rain. No one in town had seen Blaze, and nobody, not even her parents, believed Emily's wild theory about the bobcat. But Emily hadn't forgotten. Not for a moment. Each evening, she placed Blaze's favorite toy mouse on the porch. She left out fresh food, the soft canned kind he used to love, hoping the scent might guide him home. But every morning, she found the dish untouched, except maybe for a few curious ants. Then, on the 10th night, something changed. Emily lay on her bed, holding a photo of Blaze taken on her birthday. She tied a tiny blue ribbon around his neck that day, and he'd let her, mostly. In the photo, his eyes were soft, curious, kind. She sighed and turned toward the window. That's when she heard it. A soft, scratchy sound, claws tapping lightly on the glass. She froze. Then, slowly, she slid out of bed and crept to the window. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the latch and eased the pane open. A shadow slipped through the gap, small and silent. It was Blaze. "Blaze!" Emily gasped. The kitten leapt into her arms, and she hugged him tightly, tears already spilling down her cheeks. He was warm. He was real. He was home. But something didn't feel right. As Emily pulled back to look at him, her joy flickered with uncertainty. The fur was the same, glossy black with the familiar white patch on his chest. He was the same size. But his eyes, they weren't Blaze's eyes. Blaze had gentle, amber eyes that sparkled with mischief and affection. This kitten's eyes were gold too, but sharper, wary, watchful. He didn't purr. He didn't nuzzle into her the way Blaze used to. Instead, he stiffened in her arms, ears flicking at every sound, muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Emily set him down on the carpet. The kitten prowled the room in silence, his movements low and smooth. Too smooth. Too precise. Not like the clumsy Blaze who had once fallen off the windowsill chasing dust motes. Emily sat down, watching him. This wasn't Blaze. Not really. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe Blaze had changed. Maybe being out in the woods had made him tougher. Maybe she was just imagining things. She wanted to believe it. But the feeling in her gut said otherwise. She decided to call him Shadow. It felt wrong to call him Blaze. At breakfast the next morning, her mom gasped when Shadow strolled into the kitchen. "Oh my goodness, look who came home!" David looked up from his coffee. "Well, I'll be. Where've you been, little guy?" Emily said nothing. Laura crouched beside Shadow and scratched behind his ears. "He's gotten stronger. Maybe he learned to hunt while he was away." "Good for him," David said, nodding with admiration. Emily watched as Shadow slipped under the table, barely brushing their feet. That day and the next, Emily made mental notes of every odd behavior. Shadow wouldn't touch the canned cat food, But when Laura left a package of thawing steak on the counter, Shadow leapt onto the kitchen island in one graceful motion and tore into the raw meat like a miniature predator. He didn't bat at his toy mouse. He stalked it, low to the ground, eyes narrowed, then pounced with terrifying precision. When Moose barked at the mail truck, Shadow didn't flinch. He ran straight for the barking, ears forward, tail stiff, ready to fight. But what convinced Emily beyond all doubt was what happened on the third night. She was brushing Shadow's fur when her fingers stopped at a rough patch just behind his ear, a tiny scar. Blaze had never had that. She leaned in closer and noticed something else, faint spots along Shadow's back and sides, barely visible. But they were there, the same pattern she remembered from her schoolbook, bobcat markings. Emily's heart thudded. She got up, went to her desk, and pulled out a stack of books from the library. Wildlife of Alberta, Bobcats of Banff, Animal Camouflage and Mutation. She flipped through them feverishly. Her eyes widened at one paragraph near the middle of the chapter. In rare cases, bobcat kittens may be born with melanism, a genetic mutation that causes black fur. These individuals often resemble domestic cats, especially when young. Another page. Bobcat mothers are fiercely protective. There are cases, though rare, where they've adopted abandoned young, especially those resembling their own. Emily closed the book slowly, her mind racing. What if the bobcat hadn't kidnapped Blaze? What if she had swapped him? Shadow for Blaze. A wild kitten, hidden in a domestic home. A house cat, learning to survive in the woods. The idea was wild, unbelievable, and yet it explained everything. Emily glanced at Shadow, who was now perched on the highest shelf in her room, peering down like a panther. Their eyes met. For a moment, she felt as though he understood what she was thinking. Not a threat, not a villain, just a child placed in the wrong world. Later that evening, Emily sat at her mom's computer and composed an email. Not to a friend, not to her teacher, but to Dr. Elaine Foster, a wildlife biologist who had once spoken at her school. She kept the message simple. She described Blaze's disappearance, the arrival of a nearly identical kitten. The behavior changes. She didn't mention the swap, not yet. But she asked, can a house cat start acting wild after living in the forest? Is it possible for bobcats to have black kittens? Do you know of any bobcat families living near Elk Hollow? Then she hit send. The truth was out there, and Emily was going to find it, for Blaze, for Shadow, and for herself. Deep in the heart of the Banff wilderness, far from the paved roads and porch lights of Elk Hollow, Blaze opened his eyes to another cold dawn. The den was dark and smelled of pine, moss, and damp fur. Curled beside him were 3 small spotted bodies, rising and falling gently with each breath. The bobcat kittens, his new siblings. He blinked slowly, disoriented. This wasn't his house. No soft blankets, no warm laundry baskets, no scent of Emily's bubblegum shampoo. Just the rough rock walls of the den and the steady rhythm of the wild. Outside, a thin beam of golden light pierced through a crack in the stone. Blaze pushed himself up and stretched, his limbs stiff. Every muscle ached. The night had been long and full of strange dreams. Dreams of soft voices, a gentle hand, a name whispered in the dark. Blaze, Blaze, come home. But he didn't cry. Not anymore. There was no one here to hear it. The mother bobcat stirred beside him. Her yellow eyes opened slowly, her ears turning at the sound of birdsong outside. Blaze met her gaze, unsure. She didn't speak, of course, but there was a quiet understanding in the way she watched him. Not angry, not confused, just patient. She rose, padded silently to the den entrance, then looked back. A silent summons. Blaze hesitated, then followed. Outside, the world was brighter, but no less wild. The forest floor was blanketed in orange needles, and the air smelled sharp and cold. Sunlight dappled through the evergreens, but shadows moved everywhere. Squirrels darting, ravens circling, something large rustling deeper in the woods. The mother bobcat led the way with long, silent strides. The other 3 kittens bounded after her, their spotted fur blending seamlessly into the surroundings. Blaze lagged behind, black fur like a smudge of ink on the forest floor. They moved until they reached a small clearing. There, the lesson began. The mother crouched low, ears forward. The kittens mirrored her instinctively, all but Blaze. He stood upright, uncertain, watching as she pointed with her nose toward a twitching clump of grass. A field mouse. One of the bobcat kittens leapt forward with lightning speed, a perfect pounce. The mouse squeaked once, then went still. The kitten dropped it at the mother's paws and purred proudly. Blaze shrank back, his stomach churned. He wasn't built for this. At home, he was fed from a clean dish, tuna in gravy, chicken pâté. Emily even warmed his milk sometimes. This was something else. The mother picked up the dead mouse and padded toward him. Gently, she dropped it in front of Blaze. He stared at it, horrified. Its eyes were still open. He sniffed it, recoiled, then looked up at the mother. She stared back, not unkindly. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him with the offering. His belly growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. With a trembling paw, he nudged the mouse. It didn't move. He closed his eyes and took a bite. The taste was sharp, earthy, foreign, but he swallowed, because he had to. Each day brought new challenges. The bobcat kittens were agile and fearless. They climbed trees like it was second nature. They leapt from stone to stone across cold streams. They disappeared into bushes and reappeared with feathers in their mouths. Blaze followed, clumsy and cautious. He slipped. He fell. He startled at every snapping twig. The others hissed at him at first, annoyed by his slowness. But they didn't bite. They watched him with curiosity. He was strange, but theirs. Over time, something inside Blaze shifted. He began to crouch lower when he walked. He learned to step silently on moss and avoid brittle twigs. He discovered he could scale a tree trunk if he used his claws right. Once, while the others wrestled, he pounced on a grasshopper and caught it. The mother bobcat watched from a distance and blinked once. Approval. The forest didn't feel as alien anymore. It was still dangerous, yes, but it was also beautiful. There were scents on the wind, meaning in every rustle, every cry. Blaze listened, learned, adapted. But every night, when the stars shimmered between the branches, he curled into himself and remembered. He remembered Emily's laughter, the softness of her flannel pajamas, the gentle scratch behind his ears. He remembered warm milk, toy mice, and the songs she hummed as she did her homework. He missed her. Desperately. One night, Blaze climbed to a high rock overlooking the valley. From there, he could just barely make out the distant lights of Elk Hollow, a soft glow in the darkness. Home. Was she thinking of him too? He sat there for a long time, the wind tugging at his whiskers, the forest humming quietly behind him. Something rustled beside him. The mother bobcat. She had followed. Blaze turned his head. Their eyes met. She stepped closer, nudged his cheek with her nose, then sat beside him. They looked out together, one from the wild, one from the world beyond. And for the first time, Blaze wondered if he could belong to both. The email reply came 2 days later. It was a rainy afternoon. Emily sat on the living room rug, stroking Shadow, or rather, trying to. He never truly relaxed under her touch. At the sound of the email alert, she jumped up and ran to her mother's laptop. From Dr. Elaine Foster. Subject: Strange cat behavior. Urgent inquiry. To Emily Henderson. Dear Emily, thank you for your thoughtful message. Your observations are extraordinary. My research team has, in fact, been tracking a female bobcat with 4 cubs on the eastern ridge near Elk Hollow. One of the cubs is jet black, an extremely rare trait caused by melanism. Even more curious, recent trail camera footage shows a 5th feline traveling with the group. Black fur, smaller build, and unique behavior. I believe this may be the cat you described. Would you be willing to meet? I'd love to hear more. Emily's heart thudded. She scrolled down, rereading the message 3 times to make sure it was real. There was even a photo attachment. She clicked it open and gasped. There they were. 4 bobcat cubs clustered around a log. 3 spotted, 1 solid black, and just behind them, slightly apart, a 5th kitten. Smaller, slender, its posture awkward, its tail held like a house cat's. Blaze. She knew it instantly. "Mom! Dad!" Emily shouted, sprinting into the kitchen, laptop in hand. Laura looked up from slicing carrots. David put down his wrench, already suspicious. "This better not be about aliens again," he muttered. "It's Blaze," Emily panted. "Doctor," Foster wrote back. "She found him." They both blinked. Then, one by one, Emily explained. The swap, Shadow's behavior, the trail cam photos. Laura frowned. David scratched his head. "Honey," her mom said carefully, "you think a wild animal traded places with our kitten?" "She didn't steal him," Emily said. "She swapped him, to protect her own cub. Think about it. Black fur is bad camouflage in the wild. Maybe she thought Blaze would be safer with us, and Shadow would survive better out there." David leaned back in his chair. "Well, that's a theory I've never heard." Laura glanced at the photo. "That does look like Blaze." Just then, Shadow slinked into the room and leapt silently onto the counter. His golden eyes scanned them warily. In one swift motion, he knocked over the bowl of thawing chicken and dragged a piece to the floor. David sighed. Yep, not Blaze. That evening, Dr. Foster arrived at the Henderson home. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with short, silver-streaked hair, hiking boots caked with mud, and kind, alert eyes behind square glasses. She carried a tablet filled with photos and notes. Emily told her everything. Dr. Foster listened closely, occasionally nodding or scribbling. Finally, she looked at the family. "I can't say with scientific certainty," she said, "but all signs point to something rare, something remarkable." She turned to Shadow, who crouched behind the couch. "I'd like to examine him, if I may." With the family's permission, and some gloves, Dr. Foster spent the next half hour measuring, observing, and documenting. Shadow hissed, growled, and even tried to bite. Eventually, she stood and made her conclusion. Canine length, muscle tone, claw curvature, and behavior. This kitten is not a domestic cat. He's a bobcat, young, probably 8 to 10 weeks old. The match is consistent with the black cub from the mother we're tracking. Laura covered her mouth. David shook his head slowly. "We've had a wild animal in our kitchen," he muttered. Emily turned to Dr. Foster, hope lighting her face. "So, can we get Blaze back?" Dr. Foster hesitated. "We can't just trap a wild bobcat. That would be illegal and dangerous. But maybe we don't need to." She unrolled a blueprint of sorts, a diagram of a humane 2-chamber trap. "We've used this before to study animal behavior. One side for Shadow, one for Blaze. No harm, no force. If we set it up near the house, under the right conditions, we may be able to trigger a natural reverse exchange." David raised an eyebrow. Like, trade 'em back? Dr. Foster nodded. If the mother recognizes Shadow's scent, and Blaze recognizes home, they may make the choice on their own. We just need to help it happen. The plan was simple, but delicate. On the next full moon, the same phase as when the swap first occurred, they would place the trap in the backyard, close to the window where it had all begun. Inside one compartment, Shadow, placed gently with a piece of raw meat and a cloth carrying the scent of his bobcat family. In the other, Blaze's pillow, favorite toy mouse, and a blanket Emily had wrapped him in every night. The trap would remain open. Sensors would detect entry. Once both kittens were inside, and only then, the compartments would seal softly, keeping them safe. From there, each would be released to the world they belonged to. Emily's task was the hardest, placing Shadow in the trap at the right moment, without frightening him. "I can do it," she said. Dr. Foster smiled. "You've already done more than most 10-year-olds ever could." The night of the full moon arrived. The sky was clear, glowing with silver. The trap stood in the grass like a strange metallic puzzle box, almost invisible in the dim light. From the shadows, Dr. Foster and her 2 assistants watched with binoculars. David waited inside the house, finger ready on the remote control. Emily sat quietly by the window. Shadow nestled beside her, twitching at every sound. He was restless, anxious, as if sensing something was near. At exactly 11:04 p.m., Shadow stiffened. Emily looked up. Outside, just beyond the tree line, a shape emerged. Then another. The mother bobcat stepped into view, graceful, silent, and fierce. And behind her, a smaller figure, Blaze. His fur looked a little rougher, his frame leaner, but his eyes, those soft amber eyes, were unmistakable. Emily's breath caught. Blaze had returned. The full moon bathed the Hendersons' backyard in a pale glow, casting long shadows across the dewy grass. The trap stood still beneath the old maple tree, open, waiting. Every light in the house was off except for one dim lamp in Emily's room, its window slightly cracked. She held her breath. Shadow sat beside her, tense, ears perked. His muscles were taut as a bowstring, and his golden eyes flicked toward the trees beyond the fence. Then, from the shadows, the forest answered. The mother bobcat emerged like a ghost, silent, deliberate. Her powerful form moved with purpose, her tail low, her head high, and behind her, a smaller shape followed hesitantly, taking measured steps. Blaze. Emily's heart leapt. Even at a distance, she knew. His stride was still a little awkward. His tail swayed differently than the wild cub's. But those amber eyes, wide, uncertain, full of memory, they were his. He paused at the edge of the garden, sniffing the wind. Emily could only imagine what he was sensing. Home, baked earth, the worn wooden fence he once climbed, the faint scent of Emily on the breeze. His ears twitched, his paws shifted in the grass. He remembered. The mother bobcat stopped near the trap, her eyes scanning the yard. She was wary of human smells, of metal, of what might happen next. But something drew her forward. A scent? A sound? Inside the trap, Shadow stirred. He let out a low, rumbling sound, not a hiss, not a meow. Something in between. It wasn't angry. It was recognition. Blaze stepped closer. He saw the toy mouse, the blanket, his old pillow, worn soft from naps in sunbeams. He let out a small, uncertain chirp. Then, with barely a sound, he entered the open compartment of the trap. The door clicked shut, soft and sure. Dr. Foster gave the signal. David pressed the button inside the house. The second compartment opened with a soft clink. Shadow lifted his nose. He sniffed the air, and then, like a shadow slipping free of the light, he darted out, straight toward the bobcat. The mother turned just in time to catch him as he leapt into her side. She licked his face, nuzzled him, wrapped her body around him like a shield. Emily could hardly breathe. She wanted to cry, to shout, to run outside, but she didn't. This moment belonged to them. Blaze and Shadow now stood on opposite sides of the trap, the metal mesh between them. Two black kittens, two worlds, two journeys, intertwined. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Shadow blinked once. Blaze meowed softly. Then the mother bobcat turned. She looked toward the house, not at the trap, not at the people hiding in the shadows, at Emily's window. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, time stilled. No growl, no threat, only a quiet, powerful understanding. And then, with Shadow safe beside her, she turned and melted back into the woods. Emily was already halfway down the stairs. She burst out the back door, feet flying across the grass, arms wide. Blaze was inside the trap, crouched, tail tucked low, confused but unhurt. "Blaze," she whispered, kneeling down. He meowed again, a tiny, hoarse sound. David and Laura appeared behind her, Dr. Foster and her assistants close behind. Emily opened the trap door slowly. Blaze hesitated. Then, with a small, trusting step, he walked into her arms. She clutched him to her chest, burying her face in his fur. He smelled like pine and dirt and cold nights, but underneath, still Blaze. "I missed you," she whispered. He nuzzled her neck. Behind them, the forest swayed gently, as if breathing out a sigh. The days that followed were filled with quiet wonder. Blaze slept a lot at first, curling up beside Emily like nothing had changed. But some things had. He moved differently. He was faster, sharper. He chased moths with laser precision, and once leapt from the bookshelf to catch a fly mid-air. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Our little couch potato's become a ninja." David just shook his head. "Woods'll do that to you." But Blaze was still himself. He purred when Emily hummed. He pawed at her shoelaces. He rubbed against Moose, who accepted him with a happy thump of his tail. Dr. Foster visited twice more, documenting Blaze's recovery and behavior. She confirmed that he had integrated remarkably well, yet never fully shed his domestic instincts. A hybrid in spirit, not in species, but in life. As for Shadow, trail cameras captured fleeting glimpses of him with his family. Strong, healthy, thriving. He had resumed his place among his true siblings, leaping logs, chasing hares, vanishing into the trees with the grace of a true wildcat. "This," Dr. Foster said one afternoon, "is one of the rarest exchanges I've ever seen. Nature doesn't usually work like this, but sometimes it makes room for the extraordinary." Emily smiled, scratching Blaze under the chin. He was never ordinary. Sometimes, on full moon nights, Blaze would still sit by the window, staring into the forest. Emily would sit beside him, neither speaking. She wondered if he remembered, if he missed them, if he still felt a part of both worlds. And once, just once, she swore she saw something at the edge of the yard, a pair of glowing eyes, a small black shape, watching, then gone. Maybe it was a dream, maybe not. Either way, she whispered good night. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't about what can be explained, but what can be felt. A mother's love that crossed species, a kitten's journey that bridged two lives, and a bond that no forest, no fence, no silence could ever break.